Contra is the originator of the run-and-gun genre of games. To me, it is the pinnacle of action game design. Every enemy, stage hazard, and boss counts for something in this series, but some foes aren't worth the sum of your button presses, or the time invested into overcoming them. Though Contra has a better batting average than some contemporary Konami franchises, bad bosses are bound to rise wherever the spawn of Red Falcon take root. Before we start pointing guns, let's lay the groundwork. Do not fret, my fellow Contras.
We'll blow it all back to hell again later.
Generally, I'm gonna try avoid listing bosses that are outright pushovers, because they're pretty common on lists like these and aren't much fun to talk about. The NES original gets an exemption from this list on account of most of its bosses being underwhelming in the least interesting way possible. I will also be excluding bosses from games I haven't played, and Contra Force because it's not really a Contra game and it'd be unfair to put it in contention with these other ones. This leaves 10 defenseless games in the crosshairs. Now let's make like Bill Mad Dog Riser and take 'em out! A final boss in the very first entry on this list? This isn't a ruse, and I certainly haven't been skinned and replaced with an alien at the Fort Firethorn Rehabilitation Center at 9:20 p.m. on the night of July 17, 1990. He had no mind. This boss isn't necessarily bad, but the execution leaves something to be desired. Cyril will sprout long appendages from holes in the ceiling that proceed to coil around the screen in one of 3 specific ways. Destroy an arm, and a bar will appear for you to latch onto, and shoot Cyril directly. Once the boss has taken enough damage, it will leave the screen, and you'll have to contend with one of a few randomly selected attacks, much like how this fight was in Contra 3. The issue is that the boss lacks variety in its attack pattern, and it isn't made clear if this boss is supposed to be defeated in phases or not. You need to concentrate as much prolonged fire on the brain as possible, since despite what it may seem, this fight does not have a set length. It could last several rounds, or you could kill it before it gets a chance to do anything. In my first attempt against it, I used this crush gun, expecting it to have the best damage per second spread on this boss, but in actuality, the upgraded machine gun gets the job done much more effectively. Such a middling end to a fantastic game. The ending is still god tier though, with the helicopter breaking through the ceiling. Remember how I said at the start of this video that the first game was exempt from this list? For reasons I can't readily explain, the arcade version is not. I shall now divert your attention to the obvious question running through your head right now. Muga is a revered and iconic boss in the series. How did this version, let alone any version, wind up on this list? Simply put, it's a bitch to hit. First, there's the arcade game's wonky controls. Though 8-way directional aim is the standard throughout the series, the arcade games actually have 12-way directional aim. There's a high and low diagonal shot for each quarter circle on the joystick. This theoretically greater degree of control is it actually makes this game so hard to come back to nowadays. Lining up shots is just so finicky. These aim issues are on full display when facing Muga, a moving target with a deceptively thin hitbox. The obstructions don't even end there. The arcade Contra is a fair bit taller resolution-wise than its much improved NES port, so Muga is positioned a tier higher than you might remember. Beyond that, this splitting illusionary nuisance hardly deviates from what you're familiar with. It launches balls that home in on you, and at the start there's some turrets and guys leaping towards you in wingsuits, but that's it, really. Even with the spread gun, Muga is a pain to hit. Remember to make sure your game controls well before you ship it, kids! You're probably scratching your head right now. Such is the nature of Operation C, a game often overlooked in favor of its console counterparts. This is the game's third boss, a sluggish tank controlled by a floating capsule that can extend its limbs at you. What's the issue? I don't rightly know! I wrote most of this script half a year ago. I just needed something to fill this slot with. I'm so dreadfully sorry. Super Contra, though often derided as being highly derivative of the first game, stands on its own 2 feet as a well-balanced action game. featuring numerous small-scale improvements that push the series forward, such as better weapon balance, sloping level geometry, and more spectacular set pieces. Players are beholden to massive opponents who swoop in from off-screen, making the screen rumble as this game's epic boss music kicks in. It's all very bombastic. Here's a case where spectacle alone is not enough to save a boss from this list, Kimco. Here's a scenario you might find yourself in. You get to the end of this poison palace and reach a dead end. Suddenly, the wall in front of you begins to crumble, and a giant beast erupts out of the ground. You take aim, prepare to blow this thing apart until there's nothing left, and the boss fires a few measly projectiles at you and promptly dies. You saw that right. This thing is a pathetic pool of health, even in 2-player mode. Its projectiles are easily dodged, and it's totally inert. You can stand on this thing and take no damage. It's embarrassing, this waste of potential. Give it some harder to dodge attacks, more health, make it move around, do something. Contra is a series where you can afford to have difficulty spikes every now and then. This has to be the world record for biggest pushover boss relative to size in this series. And the best part? It's not even the worst one. Contra Rebirth is a criminally short game, but it had some killer boss fights. A giant worm falling through Earth's atmosphere, a headless mech on a construction platform, a sentient missile that files even more missiles. Absolutely radical stuff. I wonder how the 4th boss will go down. What? I know this doesn't come as much of a surprise coming off of the last entry, but this golem went down so fast it didn't even get a chance to properly introduce itself. Even Kimco got a half-minute of stardom before being anticlimactically shot down. So what exactly does this boss do if you drag out the fight? It punches the ceiling. You aren't going to see it do much, even if you purposely mishold your fire, because its pool of health is just so pathetic. You don't even need power-ups to trivialize this fight. Just stand in the middle, shoot down, and it's already dead. These last couple entries have been rather aimless. I apologize for that, but fear not. This is the last pushover boss to appear on this list, because the top 5 are sure to absolutely boil my blood. It doesn't take much to make a boss that is pure bullshit. All you need is one attack that's obnoxious to dodge and you're pretty much covered. For today's representative of bullshit NES bosses, we once again turn our attention to Super Contra, an improved port of an arcade game. Alas, substantial improvement only goes so far, as one can plainly see with Stage 4, an obnoxious ascent consisting of wacky hazards, bubbles that home in on you, a sluggish elevator sentence, and this nuisance. The laser Chandelier is a deceptively simple opponent. It slowly goes back and forth, shooting lasers from its erected cannons. For each cannon you destroy, it moves and shoots faster. If you don't get to the other side before it fires, you will be cornered and suffer an unavoidable loss. Don't think about crossing to the other side of it while its lasers are going off. They fire so fast that being underneath kills you regardless of where you're standing. I just hope the next boss is less claustrophobic.
I spoke too soon.
Contra 3 is a pretty overrated piece of work. It pioneered the style of more cinematic, set-piece-driven Contras, but the game itself is pretty lacking in content, and has a lot of cheap design choices that drag the experience down for me. Chief of which is the requirement that you must beat the game on the hardest difficulty to see the true ending. And hard mode is bullshit! Enemies fire bullets at you the second they appear on screen. The hatches in Stage 2 behave strangely, one of which only opens when you aren't aiming at it. The amount of things competing for the chance to rob you of your lives is enough to make me go belly up on a run less than halfway in, and that is not for a lack of trying. Here, in the Neo Kobe steel mill, is where we meet the unscrupulous creature that draws many of my promising hard mode runs to a close, TriTransformer. TriTransformer opens with a duel on a rope over a bottomless pit. That's a pretty precarious setup already, but TriTransformer is specially engineered to make use of this environment in a really obnoxious manner. You need to grab hold of its spinning arms and hit it from the bottom to deal damage, but it's really hard to position yourself without getting hit or falling off. This boss rarely takes an active role, but how you go about combating it is its own danger, and that theme is consistent throughout the fight. You'll die more often to pits and touch vests than its actual attacks. Here's something funny. When the boss goes up in flames, its arms start spinning out of control, but your character can still automatically latch onto them, sometimes launching you into the abyss below. That's fair. Look! Up in the sky! 'Tis not a bird, nor a plane, but the TriTransformer, here to squeeze you for every last ounce of misery it can muster. This time, all it wants is to go on a lovely promenade on the side of a building while firing missiles at you. This phase of the boss sure loves to take its time. It's just obnoxious. You have to space yourself between the spread of its legs and trudge up the wall, waiting for the actual fight to resume. When it does, you'll wish it just kept walking. This part is a complete nightmare if you don't know how it works, so I'll explain it as best I can. TriTransformer will slide up and down, bearing its drills at you. If you sit in one place long enough, it will spring alive and collide with the wall, but if you crawl out of the way too soon, it may dart back to safety or never hit the wall in the first place, making for a very annoying game of waiting for the boss to reveal its weak spot and shooting it. In normal and easy mode, TriTransformer will bounce back when it hits the wall, but in hard, it scrapes against the wall, covering much more space than it would otherwise. If you're too low to the floor when crawling away from it, you'll die with no recourse. With some industry-grade persistence, you'll break past this nuisance and finish the rest of Stage 3, but it's still one of the longest set pieces in the game. I dread to think of whatever garbage Contra 3 has left in store for me. Let me tell you something. I love Contra Hardcore. It's my favorite Contra game by a nuclear landslide, and the best way to illustrate that is with a bit of context into this video's production. Initially, this was going to be a top 10 best Contra bosses, but I decided to do a worse list instead, both because there's less things to choose from, and because best bosses list would be largely dominated by this game alone. It's understandable, the game's focus is primarily flashy boss encounters, so they ought to be good, and for the most part, they are.
There's no use beating around the bush any longer.
20-something to 1 is a great batting average,
But holy hell, that one is awful.
This cretin, adorning the Longhand Guy moniker, is a masterclass in how to waste as much time as possible. A boss that manages to overstay its welcome so much, it'll still be raiding your pantry for beer 4 days after your bar mitzvah ended. I'm spouting off a lot of contrived jokes, but how does this boss actually work? Time for a breakdown! In the first phase, Longhand Guy will affix itself to the walls and become vulnerable to attack. As you deal damage, the mech will begin spinning wildly, and while in this state, its lasers will shoot out in every direction and become too erratic to dodge reliably. What the game wants you to do is hammer it while it's idle, and then lay off so it isn't spinning when its lasers fire. It's an interesting way to design a boss, but it gets really tedious if it takes too long. Once you deal enough damage, Longhand Guy will start inching towards you until you hit a wall. Then, it will sprout a propeller and continue pursuit. This phase is a complete waste of time. Attacking the boss here just makes it harder to dodge, and more notably, it's completely skippable. If you just hold up when this section begins, you'll go off screen and the boss can never hit you. Pretty glaring oversight. Next phase is a bit better. Longhand Guy fires a laser that bounces from wall to wall, and you gotta wiggle around it to avoid dying. When the laser disappears, the boss will roll up the slope, then fall back down again, and the cycle repeats. This is actually kind of fun. You can attack the boss whenever, and there are no repercussions for it. The next phase is also a waste of time. Now Longhand Guy's running away from you while firing missiles out of its back. I feel like this is a good time to mention this. If you choose to rescue the research center earlier in the game, you'll see Deadeye Joe piloting the mech, but literally all this changes is the phase where the boss runs away from you. That's a huge missed opportunity. Also ties into a bigger issue I have with this boss. There's no avoiding it. Contra Hardcore is a very replayable game. There are 4 major endings and 4 playable characters, but no matter what route you pick, you have to slog through this fight. The stage 1 and 3 bosses are also mandatory, but most fights are fun, and more importantly, don't waste your time! This final phase is what cemented this boss's placement on this list. Longhand Guy clings to the center of the arena and fires a beam that covers the screen counterclockwise. When hit, the boss springs like crazy, which in tandem with having to stop shooting in order to dodge its attack, just gives the boss even more staying power. Fuck! Go away, Longhand Guy! I'm sick of your ragdoll physics, just let me go back to the fun stuff! The thing is resilient as all hell! It doesn't die even if hit with 2 nukes! Also worth noting, Brownie is short and doesn't get hit when the boss bounces if he's on the ground. Also, for whatever reason, his Gemini scatter doesn't activate the boss's crazy jiggle physics. All of Fang's options do, though. That blows. Fuck you, Longhand Guy. When it comes to games, movies, TV, any form of media, I tend to strongly prefer things that have a rough opening but a good finisher to things that start off great but don't end well. Contra Rebirth is distinctly the latter. The game peaks with its 3rd stage and begins to lose steam in stage 4. The real drop-off occurs right as we reach the number 6 entry on this list, and the game enters its death spiral. Stage 5 is painfully underwhelming, with its short length and uninspired design. What'll the final boss be like? Oh. What is that? The fandom page says this is the Zealous force from the Gradius series, but surely you'd believe me for thinking otherwise. I have no clue what the fuck this boss is trying to be. Okay, fine. I'm fighting an inkblot with a ceramic plate for a face on the surface of the moon. I can overlook that if the fight is good. It isn't! This blobby bastard begins by magically growing bright pink anuses that shoot copies of your player character in their roll animation. They drop power-ups when shot, so make sure to do so. The boss has 3 other attacks, each for a different cardinal direction. All of them are garbage-themed for some reason. When the moon faces left, it'll create a shield of orbiting garbage, which you can shoot at with the vain hope of getting to the boss underneath. After a bit of moving around, the boss will fly up and drop its inventory on your head. The assortment of things it drops, combined with the camera shift, makes dodging this trash really disorienting, but without power-ups, it's your only option. That said, whenever I throw hands with this dumpster fire, I pray it chooses this attack over the other 2. When the moon faces right, it'll move around the arena and periodically drop a spray of glitter on you. This attack is completely fucking aggravating. The trash can land on you even if you're on the opposite side of the arena. If the boss is directly above you when it drops trow, you're done for. Your shots just aren't strong enough to overpower the downpour of debris. Finally, when the moon is upside down, the boss will gather 4 clumps of garbage and smash them against the ground. On impact, the clumps will release debris. I feel really stupid every time I get hit by them. The boss will use these 4 attacks on repeat for the entire ordeal, and it's just... why? What the fuck is this thing? Why garbage? Why couldn't it be something else? Why does it giggle like a child every time it kills you? I have so many questions, but given how elusive details on the development of WiiWare games tend to be, I doubt they have answers. Some of the bosses on this list probably got a harsher rap than they deserve, but this one is genuinely, purely, conclusively awful. Contra Rebirth could have been so much more. Full Spirited 2010 time, baby! Let's do a recap.
Number 10, Cyril. Number 9, Goto Muga. Number 8, Khazard 408. Number 7, Kimco. Number 6, Animated Statue. Number 5, Laser Chandelier. Number 4, TriTransformer. Number 3, Longhand Guy. And number 2, Zealous Force.
Here comes number 1. With every Contra game comes a desire to reinvent the way we pump lead into our enemies. 3D levels here, overhead levels there, consistency nowhere. Contra 3 in particular has a very strange and unique pair of gimmick levels. Via Mode 7, Contra 3 rotates a background to follow whatever direction you're moving in. Say what you will, there was nothing else like this at the time. However, without a careful hand, this gimmick could become seriously disorienting. Okay, enough preamble. Your deductive reasoning probably kicked in the moment I mentioned Contra 3. Anyone who's played the game knows there could only ever be 2 candidates for the #1 spot. And it's not that one. Latchkeys, gentlemen, tire fume huffers of all ages, I present to you my least favorite boss in this series, an abominable adversary whom I have dubbed Spinning Eyesore. Once you destroy the last anthill in Stage 5, you'll find yourself in this sandpit with worms that want to gnaw on you. Destroy them, and they'll drop free power-ups. This would be fun for grinding, but if the power-ups drop inside the boss, you can't get them. And they also take a lot of bullets before quickly retreating to their holes. To progress this fight, turn your attention to the eye in the middle. Once you shower it with enough bullets, you'll regret everything you've ever done to reach this point. Spinning Eyesore plays its whole hand, and now you have to contend with fire jetting out of the boss's orifices, worms that follow you everywhere, and oh yeah, spinning fucking sand! If you aren't holding L or R while in the sand, you will uncontrollably twirl around and be unable to aim at the boss. How's this fight in hard mode? Ah! Turn it up, turn it up, turn it up! My eyes can't handle it! I don't think there's another boss in this series that encompasses the sheer misery of losing control as much as this one. At this point in the fight, I would just rush to the center with my invincibility frames and try to end this nightmare as quickly as possible. But there actually is a way to regain some semblance of control in hard mode. A way that you wouldn't know about. By double tapping L or R, you rotate twice as fast in that direction. Fast enough to keep a steady aim while fighting this boss. But I didn't know about this for several playthroughs. It isn't mentioned anywhere. I read both the American and Japanese manuals for this game. Neither of them mentioned that you can do this. There's nary a situation where you would want to do this, even in hard mode, but it's necessary to make the Spinning Eyesore fight doable. That is unfathomably putrid. Even if you have the double tapping down, the game puts up a lot of resistance. If you double tap before entering the sand, you'll just go nuts and be easily killed by whatever's in front of you. You have to go in and double tap L or R at the right time to make sure you're aiming at the boss's weak point. What? You're off the mark by a smidge? Let go of the button and try again! You're complete fodder for this boss's attacks at this point, but what does that matter anymore? God, I hate this. There's just no winning with it. I am convinced that Contra 3 was not designed with no-hit runs in mind, and having opponents like this, who just sap your lives like this, is damning proof. I think I'm gonna be sick. This has been my first top 10. I love Contra. Maybe the next time I talk about it, it'll be in a more positive light. See ya!